So today's the modern worldview. And if we were to take the kind of general understanding, a generalization about the tremendous shift from the Middle Ages to the modern era, we could say that it could be summed up as a shift. You often would hear this as a generalization, a shift from a primary allegiance to religion to a primary allegiance to science, as kind of like the bottom line arbiter of what is truth, what is the ultimate reality that human beings need to attend to, bottom line. You would also get a generalization that it's a shift from a focus ultimately on God to a focus on the human being, or on man, as the human being would generally be personified, and also a shift from in terms of social political reality, from Christendom to secular society. And that generalization would certainly be valid overall. But if there is a constant in our exploration of the evolution of Western thought and culture, that is that it's paradoxes all the way through. There's always the opposite that's present at any given time, and also that there's mortgages to the past, to use Vogelin's term, that every revolution brings with it, often kind of hidden in the baggage, certain aspects of the preceding worldview, and also that the preceding worldview, the preceding cultural matrix, in many ways makes possible the new era, even though it's in some sense a rebellion against it, or out of it, an emergence out of it. So all those that element of paradox, of dialectic, of complexity is something that I want us to carry all the way through our reading of this history. Now, you've got this extraordinary situation where after what must have been experienced as just an apocalyptic cataclysm in the mid-14th century with the Black Plague, just decimating so much of the European population, a sense of helplessness under its impact. Then you've got this, there's all sorts of shifts that start taking place in the wake of that. In some sense, in some instances, made possible by the decimation of the preceding social structures and economic structures. But then suddenly, 500 years ago, you get a kind of accelerated blossoming of a new, not only cultural sensibility, it's like a new universe and a new mode of being human enters into the collective psyche with astonishing rapidity. You basically have, this is pretty much exactly 500 years ago. So we're right now at the end of 2012, exactly 500 years ago. In the fall of 1512, Michelangelo finishes the Sistine Chapel ceiling. And you have that beautiful painting, of course, of the among many other things on the Sistine Chapel ceiling, you have God touching Adam at the moment of creation in this rendering of Genesis that is a kind of visual image, a metaphor for the whole almost like a downloading of the divine, a touching of the divine into the human that takes place in that time. And in fact, it's within months of that 1512, 1513 moment where the Sistine Chapel ceiling is finished, that you have the Reformation starts taking shape in the psyche of Martin Luther, and Copernicus begins the scientific revolution by writing the short version of the commentary, the short version of what became his great work, De Revolutionibus. In this case, the short version was called the Commentariolus, and he circulated it amongst a small number of people in around 1513. So he's probably conceiving of it, writing of it, gestating it right at the moment this Sistine Chapel ceiling is finished. You've got the moment that the Europeans, for the first time, see the Pacific Ocean on the Panama Isthmus, looking across to the Pacific, and suddenly having that sense of a vast world further opening up. And just a few years later, Magellan makes the full expedition around, or rather the Magellan expedition makes the full circumnavigation of the globe. Magellan himself didn't make it all the way, but his ships did. And you have the printing press spreading literacy as never before, with its deep transformation of the individual consciousness, the ability to be able to read things independently of the church, an opening of moving in many ways away from the oral tradition to people silently reading. In the past, you basically would be getting things read to you in a group rather than that privacy, the individual consciousness being empowered by the printing press in this way, and of course making possible the Reformation and the scientific revolution, which couldn't have happened without the printing press. And Raphael and Michelangelo and Leonardo seem to have this almost divine capacity to render a new kind of objective perspective and the human form and landscapes with simultaneously a kind of numinosity and a kind of scientific accuracy. I mean, they were doing really careful studies of anatomy. Michelangelo and Leonardo were studying the inside of the human being through surgical operations on corpses, and they were really interested in getting it as objectively authentic as possible. And right there you have that kind of Renaissance holding of the paradox of the scientific and this kind of spiritual numinosity that they were able to convey at the same time as this aspiration for scientific objectivity. So it's like the modern self is, I've called it elsewhere, the crowning that in the birth process that happens, where the the infant's head is just starting to be seen coming out of the birth canal. That's the moment 500 years ago where we could say the modern self is crowning. And there's that great anticipation of the modern self that Pico della Mirandola, 23 years old, writes a kind of new version of the creation in a synthesis of because he's taking in all the new scholarship, the new knowledge of Greek thought and literature and Roman, but also, so he's drawing on Greco-Roman, also other cultures, Chaldean, in particular Egyptian, and he synthesizes this with the Judaic and Christian or kind of mythos, and he uses both the biblical Genesis and the Platonic dialogue, cosmological dialogue, the Timaeus, and he puts these together in this synthesis on the oration on the dignity of man. And this is kind of the Renaissance manifesto for the new human self. And here's where he says, this is Pico. It's interesting how somebody as young as 23 can be writing something like this, but then you think about Bob Dylan, 24 years old, bringing it all back home, 25 years old, bringing out Like a Rolling Stone. The Beatles, of course, are all like 22, 23, 24, and mediating a whole radical shift of consciousness. The puer aeternus archetype, the eternal child, seems to be able to carry. It's got a kind of direct lightning rod up to spirit in some sense. So he synthesizes all these, but then he goes dramatically further in this kind of prophetic anticipation of the new age and the new being that he senses as being born, within himself, but within the collective. And he says this, for setting up what he says. He's describing God creating the world, and after God had completed the creation of the world as a kind of sacred temple of his divine wisdom, he at last considered the creation of the human being, whose role, as Pico saw it, would be to reflect on and love the immense grandeur of the divine creation. But God found that he didn't have any archetypes left, Pico's word, to make the human being. And God therefore said to his last creation, "Neither a fixed abode, nor a form that is thine alone, nor any function peculiar to thyself have we given thee, Adam, to the end that according to thy longing and according to thy judgment, abode, whatever form, whatever functions thou thyself shall desire. The nature of all other beings is limited and constrained within the bounds of laws prescribed by us." He's got the plural, divine creator. "But thou, constrained by no limits, in accordance with thine own free will, in whose hand we have placed thee, shall ordain for thyself the limits of thy nature. We have set thee at the world's center, that thou mayest from thence more easily observe whatever is in the world. We have made thee neither of heaven nor of earth, neither mortal nor immortal, so that with freedom of choice and with honor, as though the maker and molder of thyself, thou may fashion thyself in whatever shape thou shalt prefer." So at this moment, as God is touching Adam on the Sistine Chapel ceiling, and in a sense giving Michelangelo this kind of godlike power of poiesis, of artistic creativity and capacity to realize the creative impulse. Pico has prophesied this awakening of a new form of human being who would be free in a way that has a new, it's drawing on earlier sources, but it has a new flavor. There's a new climate. It's got something else is in the air. And within the span of a single generation, so Pico does that in 1486. All right, this is at the kind of peak of the moment that the Renaissance. It's at the heart. Let's call it the heart of the Italian Renaissance at that point. Leonardo is just beginning his great paintings, and Botticelli paints the Birth of Venus and Primavera, and Ficino has just finished the translating of all the Platonic dialogues into Western language, Latin, for the first time. So this is the kind of peak of the when the Platonic humanist Renaissance was really getting underway. So that's 1486, and if you take from there and go 150 years, that's when Descartes in 1637 does the cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am, the discourse on method, the whole articulation of a completely autonomous, rational ego with a sense of both separation from the rest of nature, but tremendously empowered rational intelligence that can understand, manipulate, and even in some sense become a master of nature, but tied to a profound new quality of emancipation from the past, just wiping the slate clean. Like there's so many contradictions in everything we've been taught, and we need to just start thinking for ourselves, just using our total common sense and capacity to see with rational clarity the distinct ideas that present themselves before us. And with this new confidence, this is 1637, Descartes articulates that new sense of the autonomous modern rational subject in a world of objects that it can now understand and mathematically comprehend, manipulate technologically, and exploit to human benefit. Now, if you add another half century after that, you've got Newton's Principia, and that's like the completion of the Copernican revolution, and in many ways the completion of the foundation for modernity, bringing together an understanding of the heavens and of the earth as never before, but reversing the old hierarchy instead of as above, so below. Now it's as below, so above. The physics, the laws of physics that pertain to how objects on the earth move are now recognized as applicable to the heavens, which are now no longer in that separate divine realm with its own operating laws. So we can see that in the Renaissance and the birth of the Reformation and the Scientific Revolution, all at the same time, there's basically the birth of the modern cosmos and the birth of the modern self are taking place virtually simultaneously, and they're completely intertwined. And you could say the sun rose for both simultaneously. Ironically, that's at the very moment that the vanguard of the intelligentsia is recognizing that the sun isn't actually rising, and the earth is actually turning. But what a different sense of the human being. Shakespeare's born right in the center of the 16th century, same decade as Francis Bacon. And when Descartes is born, that's when Shakespeare's just coming into his own. And then when he writes, like with Hamlet, and he captures this profound sense of the magnificence of the new human being. You know, like that great Leonardo, the perfectly proportioned male stretched out like this, and Shakespeare says, how like an angel. What a piece of work is a man. How noble in reason. How infinite in faculty, in form and moving. How express and admirable. In action, how like an angel. In apprehension, how like a god. The beauty of the world, the paragon of animals. But then, in the next line, but he is just dust. And you can see Shakespeare's anticipating with his tragic vision the larger trajectory of this magnificent heroic being. I want to just show. Can we? Is it possible to show the images yet or not? Yeah. Great. So I want to just show 2 or 3 paintings that are well known from this moment in Renaissance history. And so we have, well, Chad's setting that up. There's a certain way in which you could say the Renaissance painters, artists generally, painters, sculptors, and architects, were they were like the great philosophers of the age. They were articulating the age to itself. They were writing the Summa in the same way that, say, Thomas Aquinas did in an earlier century, or they were writing the Divine Comedy that was done in poetry by Dante, but here it was being done with paintings, with this great magnificence. And there's something poignant about, this is all happening in, of course, Rome, Florence, and Venice in particular, Milan too, Milano. But in the Vatican, the Catholic Church, which is just about to explode, it's like at the last moments of its kind of medieval glory, and it draws towards itself all these extraordinarily gifted painters, artists, who render a view of the Christian view of history, of the Catholic Church, of the Western synthesis of Judaism, Christianity, Greece, and Rome in this kind of magnificent way, right at the just moments before Martin Luther posts the 95 Theses on the church door in Wittenberg, and commences the Protestant Reformation. There's something about the great the sunset. So I think okay, so there you've got the painting that I referred to in the first week and the first part of Passion of the Western Mind, where you have all the Greek philosophers and scientists, and that of course is Plato, and there's Aristotle, and they carry the perfect dialectic balance that was the theme really of that whole lecture and that sort of summation of what the Greeks brought. That combination of, on the one hand, the awareness of that transcendent archetypal dimension of the Platonic forms, the Pythagorean numbers, the gods, the divine eternal dimension, compared to the cave of the world that the unenlightened lives within. And at the same time, Aristotle motioning out here with his hand towards this world, towards the empirical, towards the like biology is his science compared to mathematics is Plato's, and astronomy, and then all throughout you've got Socrates, you've got Diogenes, you've got Ptolemy. It's definitely a boys' club, and everything done with this. In a sense, it's a kind of scientific mathematical masterpiece in itself. The whole painting of this, the architectural perspectival achievement. Okay, and then let's go to the next painting. Let's see what we've got. I think if you just click on that. Oh, I'm sorry. I can do that next one. Okay, so here's the moment of Michelangelo's. And there have been, in recent years, quite interesting, there's an article in, it was the Journal of American Medicine, arguing that this shape, this unusual shape that's of the, kind of like of the cloud that's holding God, who also looks like Zeus, and but it's it's God the Creator with the angels and so forth. The shape of it is the hemisphere of the brain, and it really does seem to have this. When you think about the transmission of the solar logos that is taking place with this introjection of this new knowledge into humanity, it would be very interesting to know. We don't have anything from Michelangelo himself about why he drew it that way, but it is an arresting image when you take it in that way. And then I'll click on it and see if we can go to the next one. This is the, it's La Disputo del Sacramento. It's also known as the Triumph of the Church, but it basically carries all the, you've got God the Father, you've got Christ, you've got the Holy Spirit, you've got the whole sacrament of the Catholic Church, the Eucharist, you've got Adam and Moses and St. Paul and the saints and so on. The whole panoply of the Old Testament and New Testament is being carried by this. This is Raphael. It's also, this is also in the Vatican apartments, the Della Stanza della Signatura in Rome, the same place where the School of Athens is. This, of course, is the Pietà, which has a whole other theme of the death of the divine. So I want to give you a sense for the extent to which there was the Copernican revolution, which is the key cosmological turning point, really, of Western civilization, and certainly is the cosmological matrix and ground of the modern era. That this was something that was not simply a kind of empirical, rational advance made on the basis of better data and a kind of graduated, improved intelligence. This was a total gestalt shift. This was moving from one universe into another. And I want to give you the sense of the numinosity that the Copernican revolutionaries, particularly Copernicus, but also Kepler and Galileo and Newton, all experienced. Even Descartes, with his these dream visions that he had in 1619, there was a numinosity to the experience of new knowledge of the heavens, of reality that was being bestowed to them, that gave them the sense, and this is the hidden biblical mythos that is working in their psyche. They don't experience this as just like a kind of abstract scientific advance. They experience it as a spiritual epiphany. And in the background, there's a sense that there'd been a fall. There'd been a loss of an earlier kind of divine knowledge, and that humanity had been seeing through a glass darkly for thousands of years. And then now they were able to see the universe as it really was. And because in the past, all the different paradigms or ways of understanding and predicting the planetary motions were all understood to be human constructs that were imperfectly representing whatever was really going on, because they could never quite get it right. They were working with a geocentric cosmos. But in fact, there was a when they hypothesized the heliocentric universe, they were able to suddenly break through into an experience that they were touching reality itself, like as if they'd just come out from a darkness into the light, and that this was a divine illumination. And this is all focused on the sun. I mean, which, remember, Copernicus has his education in Renaissance Italy. He goes to Italy for his education. He's born in Poland, but he goes to Italy for where the best kind of Renaissance education could happen. And he's influenced by the Neoplatonic and Pythagorean mysticism that's coming in, and that puts a high value on both the perfection of the mathematical order that the divine had informed the universe with, and also a kind of exaltation of the sun as being, which goes right so strongly as in Plato. For Plato, the sun is the very living image of the good, the divine principle of the good and of the nous, of the divine reason. So there's this solar principle has been associated with divinity. Remember Plato, but also Christ as the solar logos, the great sun god of ancient Egypt, the first to be posited as a monotheistic deity. Let there be light. It's all a highly solar civilization, but with the Copernican revolution, that's ratified cosmologically as never before. And here's Kepler at that moment, where he has just grasped the third law of planetary motion, which kind of completes the mathematical foundation of the Copernican revolution. And he says this: now, since the dawn 8 months ago, since the broad daylight 3 months ago, and since a few days ago, when the full sun illuminated my wonderful speculations, nothing holds me back. I mean, do you hear all the dominance of the solar imagery? It's so present. Now, since the dawn 8 months ago, since the broad daylight 3 months ago, since a few days ago, when the full sun illuminated my wonderful speculations, nothing holds me back. I yield freely to the sacred frenzy. I dare frankly to confess that I have stolen the golden vessels of the Egyptians to build a tabernacle for my God far from the bounds of Egypt. If you pardon me, I shall rejoice. If you reproach me, I shall endure. The die is cast, and I am writing the book, to be read either now or by posterity. It matters not. It can wait a century for a reader, as God himself has waited 6,000 years for a witness. So you can see he's just on fire with this illumination, and really the sun is coming into him, and he's placing it in the biblical context. Stolen the vessels from the Egyptians to build a tabernacle for my God far from the bounds of Egypt. Okay, so the vessels are the Egyptian mathematical forms, which he then is putting at the altar of the Christian Creator. And you have to also remember, in terms of like how, if you read Nietzsche, as we've talked before, how on fire he is in his language, and a lot of the intensity is coming from the fact that hardly anybody was reading him. And that's also with Kepler. Copernicus, Kepler, hardly anybody really is in a position to grasp the truth yet of what they're doing and what they're seeing. So they're, when you look around, it doesn't look like the Earth is moving. It takes a total dramatic shift of consciousness to imagine that the Earth is, this huge thing is moving through the heavens. I mean, if you really get it, it's not unlike being in an earthquake. It's like, oh my God, it's moving, and you feel like the whole metaphysical foundations of your being are moving. And it was an astonishing insight on their part. And Galileo, who at the same moment that Kepler in 1609 does the first two laws of planetary motion, 1609, that's right when Galileo for the first time gets a telescope that he heard about in being first invented in the Netherlands, and he gets hold of one, he improves it, and looks to the heavens, seemingly for the first time that it had been aimed at the heavens, and started seeing all the innumerable more stars than anybody realized it were there. And he saw the phases of Venus and the Earth-like quality of the moon and the spots on the sun. and the moons of Jupiter that were, if the moons are going around Jupiter, well then the Earth could be going around the sun. And while our moon is going around the Earth. So he was getting all this evidence seen as affirming the Copernican hypothesis. So, but I want you to understand what a challenge this was to common sense, what was understood as common sense. And here is Galileo in his dialogue concerning the two chief world systems, where he describes how fundamental this shift is. And watch how he is giving to reason, to the divine reason that now is in the human, this new primary value. You wonder that there are so few followers of the Pythagorean opinion that the Earth moves. It's because of the Pythagorean anticipations of the heliocentric theory. He says, you wonder that there are so few followers. I'm astonished, however, that there have been any up to this day who have embraced and followed it. Nor can I ever sufficiently admire the outstanding acumen of those who have taken hold of this opinion and accepted it as true. They have, through sheer force of intellect, done such violence to their own senses as to prefer what reason told them over that which sensible experience showed them to be the contrary. For the arguments against the Earth's rotation we have examined in the dialogue, they're very plausible. All the reasons why we shouldn't think that the Earth is moving, they're very plausible. Aristotle was a very smart guy. All the physicists and astronomers who had been working with the geocentric universe had thought about the alternative, and there were very good reasons for why that shouldn't be happening. For example, why is there no parallax to this? Why if the Earth is moving around the sun, then the stars should get bigger when it's at one end of the orbit and smaller when they're at another end of the orbit. The only way that wouldn't be true is if the universe is so huge, the stars are so far away that the nearest stars don't show any difference, no matter how huge is the Earth's orbit. That takes a huge radical magnification of the cosmos to accommodate this. But also, why are things not falling down if the Earth is moving? Or if I throw a ball up perfectly vertically, it'll come right down to my hand. That shouldn't happen. If I throw it up and the Earth is moving, then the ball should fall over there, until you get the concept of inertia and the fact that when the ball goes up, it's also moving at the same time as I'm moving, and so forth. So all these things had to be thought through. So Galileo goes on. He said, and the fact that the Ptolemaics and the Aristotelians and all their disciples took those arguments to be conclusive is indeed a strong argument of their effectiveness. But the experiences which overtly contradict the annual movement, that was he was just talking about the daily rotation. So now he says, but the experience which overtly contradict the annual movement of the Earth around the sun are indeed so much greater in their apparent force that, I repeat, there is no limit to my astonishment when I reflect that Aristarchus, among the ancient Greeks, and Copernicus were able to make reason so conquer sense that in defiance of the latter, the former, reason, became mistress of their belief. So that's what this does is, you've had thousands of years of basically man being made in the image of God, the chosen people, the covenant with God, the sense of having a direct relationship to the divinity, that human beings are in a special ontological status compared with all other forms of life on the earth. And so you've got that special connection, so that when Descartes says cogito ergo sum, and he affirms the validity of human reason, he has the confidence that the divine reason is behind it. See, that's why these diagonal lines look the same up here and down there, because it's the Cartesian sense of res cogitans, the thinking, the substance that is our subjective consciousness in his image, is a kindred to God and as spirit, compared with the rest of the world, which is matter, which is objective, which is an object, which is extended, the extended thing. And this also sets up that dichotomy in the past that was between the eternal world and the empirical world, the transcendent versus the immanent, God versus the rest of, the creator versus the rest of creation. There's also now a mind-body split that picks up the spirit-matter split and takes it into the modern era in Descartes, which Galileo is just saying, reason over sense, that I'm going to trust my reason over my senses. So there's a huge empowerment of the rational conscious intelligence over against all other forms of knowing. And it gives the modern human being tremendous sense of superiority, an arrogant superiority over every other culture that's ever existed, any other mode of knowing, that reason is superior to imagination, to emotion, to sense, to the kinesthetic. Now rationality is valorized above all. And this brings up the kind of hidden, this paradox that is at the heart of the modern drama. And that is, we know how much the shift into the modern cosmos involved a displacement of the earth from the center. And this in later centuries was described as being a sign of a kind of humbling of the human being, a de-anthropocentric move in our cosmology that is so fundamental, and that you hear over and over again modern scientists, philosophers, thinkers describing that sense of rigorous ascetic superiority of the modern perspective, because unlike the primitives, unlike the medieval perspective, the ancients, we know that we are moving on the earth as a planet, and this fundamental conviction of being on a fixed, stable, central earth at the absolute center of the whole cosmos, which is all revolving around us, that delusion characterized all previous cultural worldviews. And so this gave the modern mind tremendous sense of confidence. But the irony, the great paradox of this, is that heliocentric does not necessarily put an end to the anthropocentric. And in fact, I thought for many years trying to understand this paradox, because you think, well, if you live in a geocentric universe, then you live in an anthropocentric universe. And so the modern gets that. Why do moderns not sound so humble compared with, let's say, indigenous traditional cultures when they talk about the human being's relationship to the whole? Why this paradox, this contradiction, really? And one day I was, this is back in the 1980s, there was a New York Times columnist named Anna Quinlan who wrote columns like maybe twice a week, kind of like Maureen Dowd does now. And it was Mother's Day. And she was describing, and she was a New Yorker, but she happened to be in San Francisco on Mother's Day while her two little children were in New York. And she described what it was like to be, as a mother, that far away from her children. And as she was describing it, she said this little sentence. She said, the center of the child's universe is the mother. And suddenly I got why, because I was so dealing with the Copernican revolution in those years, I suddenly grasped why this contradiction in the shift to the modern heliocentric universe did not result in a true overcoming of anthropocentrism, and in certain ways increase the anthropocentric hubris of the modern man. And it's, you see, the indigenous, the traditional, the tribal, the primitive sensibility for hundreds of thousands of years experiences the human being as being embedded in the earth, as it were, embedded in a kind of matrix, a womb, and sometimes it could even be vividly experienced, like being inside the cave was being inside the maternal womb. And there was much more of a sense that, yes, the earth is the center, but the human being is just part of the earth. It's embedded in, along with the animals and the mountains and the spirits and the ancestors and the powerful divine beings that they can participatively channel in ritual. All of these are moving in a far more sort of fluid, interconnected cosmological condition. And what happens with the modern awakening to a moving earth is that the modern reason is recognizing and seeing the truth, and is suddenly getting a kind of God's eye view of what is objectively happening in the cosmos. It's as if one got Copernicus and Galileo and Kepler and Newton, they had to get off the earth in some sense conceptually in order to see that the earth was moving. They had to disidentify with their subjectivity, as it's been called in depth psychology. And what they did, and what the modern mind and self did, is identify with the solar logos, with the solar principle that brightly shines its light on the light of reason on the universe, and can understand it. It's that image of the divine as being the solar light. Copernicus talks about the sun as the lamp of God, as the eye of God, as the mind of God. It's a Platonic motif, and you heard it there with Kepler coming through so vividly. It's a very strong mythos and that's where the Enlightenment comes from. I mean, the sense of humanity has moved into an enlightened age. And it is now itself, in some sense, it has decathected, to use psychological language. You know what cathexis is, right? So in some sense, the modern self decathected from the earth and cathected to this transcendent position of being able to illuminate through its intelligence, its sovereign intelligence, everything in the universe, potentially. We understand so much now, but we'll understand more and more in the future with the progressive advance of human reason. And eventually, that powerful intelligence, that critical intelligence, starts seeing through all the holes in the in Genesis, in the biblical, literal perspective, biblical criticism, and then it climaxes, of course, with Darwin. You no longer need to have the divine, God, the highest, the summum bonum, the highest intelligence known to the human being is the human intelligence, as far as it can see. It's the most complex matter around the human brain, and it becomes, man becomes God in a certain way. And so there's the heliocentric revolution in many ways makes possible a more robust anthropocentrism than ever before. And that anthropocentrism permits that emptying of the rest of the cosmos of soul, of spirit, of purpose and meaning, of conscious intelligence, and only the human being carries it. Now, this is tremendously liberating in many ways. Did I talk about in the first week anything about hell? I want you to think about how, because you've read now enough of the experience of Christian theology and the Christian religious imagination to know how vividly the experience of hell hovered over the consciousness of the medieval Christian and the modern Christian for many, until they started taking in the full implications. Well, let's not say full, let's say the larger implications of the scientific revolution and of the transfiguration of the cosmos. Because remember that image of like Dante's cosmos, which was the brilliant articulation of the whole medieval Christian worldview in one poem, and the earth at the center, the concentric spheres of the planets, the angelic powers, the divine holding the whole thing. But at the center was hell. Hell is at the center of the earth. That's where Satan is. So that's farthest away from the divine. This is a crucial point. Theodore Roszak has made it, and a number of people who have studied the Copernican revolution carefully have grasped this. It's far from like the initial reaction to the Copernican revolution as it's taken in by the emerging Enlightenment mentality is a sense of tremendous emancipation, because yes, we're not seeing the angels through our telescope, we're not seeing God, but that means also that hell isn't down here. The whole heaven-hell mythos starts evaporating, and if you believed in hell, which everybody did for centuries, you believed that one wrong move or a lifetime of human fallibility is very likely to bring you eternal suffering of the most horrific kind that will last forever and ever. It never stops, and is unimaginable in its intensity, both physically and spiritually. And for those of you, I mean, I imagine there's relatively few people in the room here who grew up with that full consciousness, and perhaps as a child that hell existed and that's where you might go. But right up to certainly there are still to this day people who are living with that that hovering potential eternal punishment. It's an enormous concentrator of the moral conscience, and like nothing. Samuel Johnson's famous sentence about nothing concentrates a man's mind like a hanging. If you think about what the collective psyche, what the collective unconscious, how it might have constellated a very powerful superego, a conscience, it would be to posit the possibility of hell as something that would happen to you if you aren't very, very good. Well, you suddenly start developing kind of OCD and intense focus on your moral actions. And it succeeded in many ways. It interjected, the modern sensibility interjected that moral conscience, so that by the time of the 19th century, you've got the Victorian era bringing in a kind of universal humanitarianism that you see in figures like Charles Dickens, in Florence Nightingale, in the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, for the abolitionists, the Geneva War Conventions. The Victorian morality has basically assimilated this, and it's become now a humanist program. But the sense of liberation, of no longer feeling that you have to orient your life and make your choices according to a pre-given cosmic structure of meaning that is judging you at all times with the ultimate price of hell being paid. And of course this was if you screwed up, and if you particularly take into account the doctrine of predestination, which came in with renewed force with Calvin, you can see why it was such a liberation. And Calvin was one of the antagonists to the Copernican revolution, because he was alive when the Copernican revolution was just first starting to emerge, even before Kepler. There was a tremendous feeling of lifting of a burden, of an oppression. How many of you have read Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man by James Joyce? Well, you'll remember that chapter 3 in there was probably the ultimate sermon on hell that anybody could write. I mean, James Joyce is, such a great writer. Anyways, he's got all the Irish genius of language at his command. And he basically sums up all the sermons that have ever been given on hell throughout the Middle Ages and the early modern period. And he basically puts it into one sermon that his young hero hears on retreat. So this is late 19th century, basically, that it's placed as Joyce is growing up. So that's the Irish Catholic version of it. Meanwhile, on the continent, Max Weber, in an equally brilliant book called The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, he does an analysis of what it was like as a Calvinist. The other was Catholic in Ireland. This is the Calvinist Protestant view experience of predestination, that no matter what you did, the majority of humanity was already predestined to go to hell before they were even born. And nothing you could do was going to change it. The anxiety that set up, he makes a very compelling argument how it played a role in the emergence of the capitalist ethic and sensibility, which I gave you a short version of that in the chapter on the Reformation. So read either one of those, either Max Weber's Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, or both, because they're both masterworks. James Joyce's Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, and you'll get a sense for the tremendous liberation that was felt, and a new sense of this world being where and this life being where the drama was should be focused, and the sense of original sin not weighing so heavily on the modern human soul, combined with that sense of this illumination of cosmic understanding that the Copernican revolution brought in. So I'm seeking to describe here this great moment of solar emancipation that and kind of divine illumination that characterize this sequence of kind of convulsions, the Renaissance, Reformation, Scientific Revolution, that completely changed the cosmos and the human being in Europe and then North America, and now really everywhere in the world experiences the waves of that. And what I've been describing is the experience of that ascent, the up from Eden, so to speak, the ascent from the past, and that the solar conquest at dawn of the darkness. And where I left you at the end of this part on the modern era was really at the high noon of modernity, where the sense of progress, of a continual ascent of the human being to ever greater horizons of self-realization through the systematic development of reason and the autonomous will connected to democratic individualism and the modern scientific rationality, that these were going to basically provide an impetus for the onward and upward empowerment and emancipation of the human being. So let's take our break and come back and have discussion about this epoch. A couple of final points before we go into the discussion. One is, I want to say one thing about the arts, the Renaissance artistic creativity. One thing about the Copernican revolution, one thing about the Protestant Reformation, and then go into discussion. The thing about the arts, there was the Renaissance artists starting in the 15th century, the Quattrocento, the 1400s. That new sense of perspectival vision and that impulse, as well as the capacity to render the world with a new kind of empirical, three-dimensional realism, perspectival realism, as we saw in these paintings. I want to emphasize how it affects both the subject and the object and their relationship. There's a certain way in which nature is freed from the iconographic tradition prior to that, and its reality is given priority over the shapes of the condition of the tradition, while the artist is standing over and against the object, looking out at it. So in other words, there's a new distance between the subject and the object that's carried by these great artists. so that the objective world is clearly situated in relationship to the subjective artistic consciousness. So prior to that, in the earlier iconic tradition, this situation doesn't exist of that separate, definitively placed subject and object. But in the new art, the spatial dimension becomes very important, and the position that the artistic subject holds in that space. Alberti, the Renaissance artist who was also a major theorist in this area, he said he called it like an open window that could, of whatever size I please, opens onto whatever is to be painted, an open window. And so the freeing of the object of nature also carries with it a freeing of the subject, as Charles Taylor discusses this in Sources of the Self. He talks about that there's a greater self-consciousness that the artistic subject has, with a new sense of distance and separation from the object, standing over and against, and no longer being englobed by what is depicted. There's a historian of art and theorist of art, Erwin Panofsky, who describes it as the new distance at one and the same time objectifies the object and personalizes the subject. And that's just what happens in the scientific and philosophical revolution that Descartes, Galileo, Newton, John Locke, Bacon, they're all achieving. That same sense of disengaging from that sense of immersion in the world, which simultaneously gives one a perspective of the objective world out there and personalizes the subject. Charles Taylor talks about how the objectification of the world empowers the subject, because the subject has now, in some sense, become his or her own authority and is no longer embedded in a world that is defining who one is. That Cartesian sense of being like, I think, therefore I am, tremendous sense of separate rational autonomy over and against the world. And that's already prefigured by the artists. Here's Taylor describing it. Didn't this also in its way prepare the ground for the more radical break in which the subject frees himself decisively by objectifying the world? The separation by which I stand over against the world perhaps helps prepare for the deeper rupture, where I no longer recognize it as the matrix in which my life's ends are set. This stance of separation helps overcome that profound sense of involvement in the cosmos, which was generated by and contributed to sustaining the pre-modern notions of cosmic order. At the same time, the new self-consciousness about the depiction of reality and the sense of breaking new ground in this reinforce awareness of the role of human poiesis, that is, human creative agency, and enhance its importance. Okay, so there's a kind of Promethean theft of the solar fire that's happening in the heliocentric, stealing the vessels from the Egyptian vessels and building the tabernacle for my God far from the bounds of Egypt. But it's, Prometheus steals the fire from the heavens. He steals the solar fire, gives it to humanity to liberate humanity from the bonds of the old gods, and that is the Promethean moment in many ways. That moment when God is touching Adam, the moment when Copernicus and Galileo and our Kepler are taking in cosmological revolution, the moment when the artists are suddenly able to render the perspectival universe with what's the word I'm looking for? Not uncanny, but like a kind of preternatural clarity and even luminosity. And now we move into the Reformation, because this is again that exact same moment. Luther stands outside the church as never before in Christian Europe. Someone stands fully outside the church and with such a sense of assurance judges the church structure, the institution, because he feels he has a direct relationship to the divine, which was forged in utter pain. It was a total spiritual crisis that he even said, I was getting to the point of like hating the divinity that would, where if God was judging me according to not only how good I was trying to be with my actions, but even my imperfections inside my consciousness that were failing, that was, as in the gospel, it's that's what is seen. He said, like, I can't meet that standard. It's impossible. I'm going to hell. And then he's reading the Bible and St. Paul's letters in particular, and he gets a new meaning of the vocabulary that God justifies in the gospel, in the Testament itself, and he understands it, that God's justice is to be understood now as we are justified by faith. It's like, I was trying to play a song here, people get ready, there's a train a-coming, you don't need no ticket, you just get on board. And that's, see, when Nietzsche said, I don't, to believe in their Redeemer, the Christians would have to look more redeemed. He said they'd have to sing better songs. And you can see how by 19th century German, the 19th century German cultural situation, the creative libido, the genius, had moved from the church music to Wagner and of course Beethoven, and but particularly by the time of Nietzsche it was in Wagner and or Berlioz in France and so forth, and Liszt, and he's taking, for him it's not being carried by the church, they'd have to sing better songs. And in a way, if you go to some church services, a good number of church services, you could very much accept the validity of Nietzsche's point. He also describes the churches as like tombs of God. Wow. I mean, have you ever walked into a church that, empty, and it is like the tomb of God in some ways. He's declaring the death of God. It's incredible. He's like tuned into this kind of incandescent vision of a deeper reality of what's going on, way in advance of what others are. So you can see why he's saying that. But as I'm trying to remember if it was Ernst Benz or I think that's who it was, Benz, German 20th century German historian of religion, says, the thing is that the Christian, the more essential spirit of Christianity, going back to its original feeling, was carried much more powerfully by the Negro spirituals, by the African American experience in gospel music. And so, like, people get ready which is Curtis Mayfield and the impressions he does. It's coming straight out of gospel music in Chicago, mid-60s. He's carrying that energy and the Black American music in the churches is much more carrying that sense of the emancipatory, just trusting the divine and the intimate relationship to the divine. Next week I'll bring another song I want to. I've got it with me, but this isn't working very well. I want to have a better setup for it that conveys this intimacy. The great song called "Jesus on the Main Line" that Ry Cooder actually played right here at Great American Music Hall, to a great recording. Anyway, that better carries that sense of the intimate and emancipatory power of the divine, which Luther experienced as well. So you have this lineage, really, of St. Paul, and really, you get like Moses, St. Paul, Augustine, and Luther, who each have an encounter with deity that is so overwhelming, and particularly in the cases of the Christian Paul, Augustine, and Luther. These are encounters in which the divine presence is so overwhelming of the sense of the sinful mortal human that it knocks one off one's horse, so to speak. But they each come out of it with this tremendously fortified sense of centered human selfhood, a center that is rooted in the relationship to the divine, and that they can stand up against the entire surrounding society, the entire surrounding culture of their time, whether it's Augustine in the late pagan Roman Empire, or Paul for either the Jewish or the pagan Roman Empire earlier, or then with Luther against the church itself, positing the priesthood of all Christian believers having a direct relationship to the divine, breaking out of the matrix of the church. So he breaks the old cosmology in the same way that Descartes does philosophically, in the same way that Copernicus does cosmologically. He's breaking out of the old matrix. And then you get all these amazing paradoxes of the Reformation. This hyper-religious fervor results in the most secular consequences that the world had ever seen. I mean, there are no societies in the history of humanity that are as secular as what comes after the Protestant Reformation and the Enlightenment. A history of religion is a history of all societies except the modern, which is not really true, because the modern too is totally pervaded by, in all these different ways, which I tried to trace out for you in that chapter, showing like the hidden continuities, the ways in which even like God's plan for man becomes the sense of progress, moving towards either utopian or progressive future of freedom and goodness and the brotherhood of man, that kind of the ideals of the French Revolution. So you get that huge paradox with the Reformation, and you get this other huge paradox of it's a very conservative event. The Protestant Reformation is a foundationalism. It's like it's a fundamentalism. Let's go back to the fundamentals. Let's go back to what the Bible says. Let's go back to the true Christian dispensation. And at the same time, and this is one of the points I make over and over again in the section you read, how much there seems to have been some larger, like archetypal movement happening in the collective psyche that was this Promethean birth, this overwhelming movement towards individuation, towards the emergence of a rebellious, autonomous, intellectually, artistically, this worldly, skeptical, open-eyed, but complex human being. And that emerges out of a religious, a cultural convulsion that was deeply, deeply religious. And then in all these interesting ways it becomes secular, like the fact that the church loses its hold and the secular powers get empowered in the different states of Germany and England and so forth, or that the national languages get empowered with the translations of the Bible into German, into English, etc., instead of it all being in Latin, or the way in which, and this was getting really subtle, these epistemological issues about how the conviction that the Protestant had that the Bible held the literal truth. This is the objective truth. Let's look and see what it says in the Bible in the original languages, and that's the truth. And let's not have all these interpretive glosses by the Catholic fathers, the scholastics and so forth. Let's just get right back to the objective reality, and that sets up two things. One is it empowers an objectivizing kind of in intellect, which is also nominalistic, and that is not buying into the scholastic Aquinas Platonic Aristotelian sense of that there is a natural revelation of divinity in everything that we see, that we can see the divine order and intelligence at work. For Luther, he's coming in as a nominalist. He's just saying, we don't know how the divine will is working. The divine will is totally free to create the world any way it wants. And so if we're going to understand the world, we just use our, in a literal, in the natural world, you use a scientific reason, and if you're going, but if you want, but in turn, your relationship to God is a totally different thing. So in all these different ways, there's a secularizing outcome, including the fact that the literal Bible becomes far more vulnerable to contradiction when the Darwinian, already with the Copernican, but particularly with the Darwinian revolution, it not squaring with Genesis, then suddenly, whoa, it looks like the Bible's really off here. And that puts in question the whole foundation of the religion, which for the Catholics could have been in the medieval period and the Renaissance. The Catholics were far more flexible in metaphorically and symbolically understanding the nature of the biblical language and statements. So that's the remarkable Reformation, which just absolutely crucial. The United States is totally coming out of that Protestant Reformation. It's one Protestant sect after another coming over and remaking the sensibility that then goes into the making of the United States. And of course, it's also deeply an Enlightenment phenomenon. The Europe in the Enlightenment, Europe had a dream, and the United States was the realization of that dream. And it was Europeans who were, it was the rebel Europeans who were leaving the Europe that was holding them back politically, socially, religiously, and they went to the United States, or they went to America, and with all the shadow and light that they brought, the city on the hill, but also the horrible original sin of its conquests and its enslavement. of other cultures, other peoples. So that's the Reformation, that's the artist. Okay, and then one thing about the Copernican revolution that I started to gesture towards. I mentioned this to a couple of people at the. This morning I wrote out, typed out carefully my the sequence of things that I was going to do here, and of course got here and realized that I totally left those notes behind. So then I was going to have to wing it. I mean, I am winging it anyway when I'm giving a lecture, but it's nice to have those kind of like the sequence of things I knew I wanted to talk about and where the quotes were and everything. But that's if there's anything crucial, I'll bring it in next time. I sometimes think those notes probably serve like the feather for Dumbo. You can watch Dumbo if you just see the. It's a great one of like Pinocchio. It's one of the great and Fantasia. When the Disney it was the first Disney golden age of animation. So remember how I was talking about how in the ancient and medieval cosmology, you basically had the, as in Dante's universe, where you have the earth at the center, and then the elemental spheres like earth, water, air, fire, and then the moon's orbit, and then the other orbits as you get past that: Mercury, Venus, Sun, and Mars, and Jupiter, Saturn, and then the fixed stars, which are the great angelic realm, and then beyond that the Godhead encompassing all. And so it was always regarded, this is what Thomas Kuhn called the two-sphere universe, so that you had the Earth was this was one sphere, and then you had the fixed stars, which represented another sphere, because that's what it looks like that as when you're out there at night surrounding us. And in between were the planets moving, and basically coming to understand those planetary wanderers was the key to the whole cosmological development, as we talked about in the first week, from the ancients, Plato in particular, right up to Copernicus and Kepler and the great resolution of that problem of the planets. And in a sense, so it's kind of like Plato and the ancient Greeks planted the seed of the Copernican revolution that flared forth with such dramatic power 2,000 years later. In that view, there was a radical, just as with Plato, there was that radical distinction between the archetypal, eternal, timeless realm of the ideas, the forms, the divine, where the sun ruled, as it were. And then there was the sublunary, as it's called, the sublunary realm. That is everything from within the moon's orbit to the earth. The sublunary is the realm of change, of mortality, of imperfection, of death, of decay, of sin, of illusion, of confusion, of seeing through a glass darkly. So there was, in this ancient and medieval cosmology, there was a radical boundary between the eternal and the temporal, and it was cosmologically carried by the moon's orbit. The sublunar, inside that is the realm of mortality, and beyond that is the realm of the divine and the eternal, the changeless, the perfect order. Now, what happened with the Copernican revolution is, so you've got all these concentric, there's the Earth in the center, and then this is Dante's universe. Right out to finally the fixed stars out here, the divine. And what happens with the Copernican revolution is suddenly the Earth gets catapulted out into the cosmos. It enters into the divine realm. It enters into the previously sequestered realm of eternity, of divinity. And even though later you get the mechanization of the world picture, in that moment of the Copernican revolution, and definitely Copernicus and Kepler are experiencing this. The Earth is ennobled by it. It's suddenly become, it's called Stella Nobilis, the noble star. The Earth is a noble star. Kepler describes the Earth as being with the planets, the other planets, revolving in adoration around the central Godhead of the Sun, and the Earth has now this parallels that sense of emerging out of the fall, emerging out of the glass darkly, out of the state of original sin. If you read like Francis Bacon or the French philosophes or the British Enlightenment philosophers, there's a tremendous sense of robust optimism and lightness of being. There's an emancipation that's happened with this enlightenment, and in the background is this sense of just having been liberated into the. It's a birth process. It's just spinning, and it's only later, and this will be next lecture and the next part that you read. It's only later that the consequences, as it were, late modern and postmodern consequences of this birth process, become apparent, and the shadow side of it starts to emerge. Okay, so I think those were the main additional points that I wanted to make right now. Oh no, there was one other thing. Okay, and then we'll let it go. Did I mention anything in the first or second week that we've met about Billy Graham? Okay, I didn't think so. All right, every once in a while, someone will say something that will reveal way more than they intended, and it can. We've just been through a whole campaign that did that. Thank God Almighty. Billy Graham, this really is so germane to this moment that we're in right now. Okay, what I'm about to say took place in the 1990s, right after a hurricane came through the Carolinas. But I want to preface that by saying Billy Graham, as many of you know, is the preeminent American Protestant teacher, leader, preacher. I think that's probably the best way of putting it. For 20th century American Protestantism, popular Protestantism. friend of quite a few presidents and so forth. Now, I want to mention on his behalf, in the 1950s, this is the 1950s, at a huge Madison Square Garden, I think it was like a week-long revival, Christian Protestant revival that was happening at Madison Square Garden. He introduced Martin Luther King. I think it was 1958. He introduced Martin Luther King. This is long before the March on Washington, very early on. He introduces King to give the opening prayer of one of the days, one of the events. And he introduces King by saying, I want to introduce Martin Luther King, Jr., this great social prophet of our time. So that was big at that. That's a side of Billy Graham and of the positive side of Southern white Christianity that was there that I want to recognize. Okay, so that's background. But now I want to say what he said at this moment of great trauma as he's talking to this community. I just happened to see this on, we didn't have any television all through the 70s and 80s when I lived in Big Sur, and then in the 90s we moved to Carmel Valley so my son could go to high school there, and we're looking at television for the first time. The first thing I saw was Václav Havel becoming president of Czechoslovakia, coming into the castle in Prague, the great dissident, playwright, existentialist, rebel, becoming president. And it just, that was 1990. Okay, so started getting into watching the news on television, a whole new experience I hadn't seen since Watergate. And it's the only way I could have written Passion of the Western Mind, by the way, was to have that much distance from the public media for that long. But Billy Graham has come to give solace to a community that has experienced its community devastated, churches, homes destroyed by this hurricane. And he says something that's very, very striking. He says, if we do not have faith in God the Father, we will be completely at the mercy of Mother Nature. Now, do you see what he just did in that one sentence? If we don't root our ultimate security in a divine transcendent, then we're totally subject, our basic being, our identity, our sense of security is at the mercy of the forces of nature, this world, the sublunary realm. Okay, you can see how he's really carrying that axial division so powerfully. And he's saying, like, remember, you've got this higher security. You have your immortal life, even though your mortal existence has just been, devastated. And he's giving, and this is part of the whole axial revolution's empowerment of a centered identity that the Protestant Reformation again affirms, as well as the rest of the modern development. But here he is in 1993, I think it is, and he says he brings in the gender, and he basically the hidden archetypal mythos that is really informing. We're always informed by one or another archetypal mythos or fantasy, as Hillman would put it in his postmodern way. But it's more than just a fantasy. It's also like an archetypal reality. And in this case, Billy Graham has put his finger on that axial revolution, Christian, but also Platonic and Judaic, and all the other axial revolutions that put their ultimate sense of the foundation of of one's highest identity, one's spiritual essence, was grounded in a higher realm that was impervious to this realm, devastations and suffering and death and imperfections. But this realm, within the realm of the moon, the sublunary, was Mother Nature. And our security is with God the Father. Okay, so it's a very sharp patriarchal mythos of sharply differentiated, where all those other different dualisms between eternity and time, the spiritual and the material, are, and good and evil too, is refracted through a gendered mythos where the masculine is connected to spirit, the divine reason, the solar logos, the eternal, the ultimate security. While this world, we're in the world of nature's unpredictability. And of course, this is very connected to our perinatal experience. Every one of us born from a maternal body, a female body that has as much overwhelming power over us as we are being born, as a hurricane does, or an earthquake, in our embeddedness in the natural world. So you can see the conflation that is so easily done at the psycho-mytho archetypal level. But behind that statement of Billy Graham's, you can see it going right through to even the modern does it, their own version of it. If we don't have faith in Father Science, we'll be at the mercy of Mother Nature or the Mother Church, right? Whatever matrix is being left behind is this kind of Promethean solar hero, this masculine patriarchal impulse, is identifying as what had been the nurturing Mother Church has now become the great oppressive constrictor. And nature, which had been in the animistic primal worldview, a much more complicatedly interwoven, like what's it called, like the pre-human flux of animals, plants, mountains, human beings, spirits, ancestors, powerful divine beings, are all interconnected in fundamental ways. They're not radical. There's no radical leaps between these different ontological beings. It's a continuous interpenetrating world. Now there's this sharp differentiation, and science carries that forward. I want to simultaneously affirm. I'm trying to have us carry the light and shadow of this at the same time. Like right at this moment, when Mayor Bloomberg says, "I want to," after the storm. Somebody was saying yesterday. Elizabeth Allison said yesterday that there was someone had written years ago that until Wall Street was flooded, there wouldn't be an awakening at the center of power to global warming and climate change. And so Mayor Bloomberg says, the reason a fundamental reason why I'm endorsing, is that as an independent, endorsing President Obama for the next term rather than Romney, is I feel that he would be more capable of addressing global climate change. and the governor of New York, et cetera, are a kind of basically, okay, we got to pay attention to science again. They seem to have known something about this, and the letting of the allowing of the corporate juggernaut of profit and greed has to be reined in. Okay, so I'm trying to carry that at that positive dimension at the same time as pointing out the shadow side of this as well that comes, and probably the two women who have done the best, or the two people who have done the best analysis, I think, of science as a masculine inflected project from this time of the scientific revolution on were Evelyn Fox Keller and Carolyn Merchant and The Death of Nature, who pointed out that it's not a coincidence that nature basically loses its animated life, its vitality, at the same time that the Copernican revolution happens, connecting with what I've been pointing out here about the cathexis, the decathecting from the Earth and the cathecting to the sun that the modern self does. At the same time that's going on. So, and the great book by Evelyn Fox Keller is called Gender and Science. It's a series of essays published by Yale University Press called Gender and Science. And she basically takes Thomas Kuhn's analysis of the sort of hidden paradigmatic assumptions that shape the theology of a scientist. She brings in the feminist revolution to that recognition of how scientific thinking is being shaped by paradigms, the great breakthrough that Thomas Kuhn brought, that we're always seeing through lenses that shape and even constitute the data that we see and that we don't see. She points out that that's true also of the masculine feminine characterizations of nature, of rationality, and so forth. So it's a really great book to read, very clear as a bell, written clear as a bell. Okay, so I'm just trying to point out these kind of multiple interweaving shadow and light paradoxes that connect the axial period, the Renaissance, the Reformation, the scientific revolution, and our own period. Okay, so any thoughts, comments, questions? Did you, in reading Passion of the Western Mind, did anybody see the Reformation differently, for example, than they did before? Or any other comments or questions that you might have? Please, Max.
You speak briefly about the influence of Hermetic lineage. I was wondering if you could say more about the influence it had on the Renaissance.
Right. There's a chapter in there called Ancients and Moderns. After I've set out the major, I think I do a whole other sequence of enumerated fundamental principles or elements of the modern transformation of our worldview. Right after that, in Ancients and Moderns, I set out the kind of hidden role, hidden to many of us today, not so hidden at the time, of esoteric, hermetic, astrological, and alchemical traditions and texts. It was really essential to this scientific revolution in its early stages, and seems to have been the record of it seems to have been kind of censored even by the people themselves, Newton in particular, for example, the key figure in the scientific revolution. Let me back up and say one thing about Newton. Alexander Pope, the great poet of the Enlightenment period, he totally captures this sense of a new universe, a new Genesis being written with the scientific revolution in that one little couplet where he says, nature and nature's laws lay hidden in night. Then God said, let Newton be, and all was light. I mean, talk about, like, he's just the Enlightenment, the everything was dark, now it's all light, the solar principle, the God said, let Newton be, and then Newton said, you know, the Principia, and voila, the modern era emerges. Okay, so, but this Newton, this like starting in the 1970s when Fritjof Capra started talking about the Cartesian Newtonian worldview, you would hardly know from our image of the Newtonian clockwork universe that Newton spent way more of his time on both alchemical texts and biblical prophecy and trying to nail down when the second coming was going to happen, and the tracing the millenarian prophecies in the Bible and trying doing all these calculations, just huge amounts of text, but also the deep influence of his reading of the alchemical texts, and even the notion of attraction at a distance in gravity is connected to the alchemical tradition's notion of attraction, and of course Giordano Bruno, Kepler, total Platonic Pythagorean mystic, living in a kind of geometrical, mathematical heaven of ecstatic epiphany. And Copernicus, I mean, he quotes Hermes Trismegistus. He refers to the Pythagoreans. Descartes was connected with the Rosicrucians. Galileo was. This was actually just revealed since I wrote Passion of the Western Mind. I knew that Galileo, or many scholars knew in the 1970s that Galileo had calculated birth charts, but it was always seen as being, well, he just did that because the chart is for his patron, the Medici, or he's just doing the thing that is expected of him by the superstitious nobles, but in fact, we now have Galileo was far more. He did readings, interpretations of the birth charts for his family and for himself right up to the end. And one thing we didn't know, I didn't know, has now been published in the Journal of Galilean Studies, is that he was first called before the Inquisition for astrological predictions of death. And this determinism that he was invoking within the astrological context, this was very early in his career, was antithetical to the freedom of the Christian believer and of God's will to do. And so that was his first encounter with the Inquisition. He may have been, he was kind of reported to the Inquisition by a jealous or somebody that had a sense of betrayal about him or something like that. They were getting back at Galileo, and he didn't have. it wasn't, there was no negative outcome that came from it when it all came to light. But I'm saying that just the Renaissance and the early scientific revolution was saturated with a kind of esoteric, magical quality, hermetic, that I think was essential to the Copernican revolution and the early scientific revolution. And it's only later that, as one historian of science says, the irony of fate transformed the mathematical mysticism of the 17th century into the mechanistic materialism, the iron mechanistic materialism of the late 18th, 19th century and the later modern worldview. But this was suppressed for various reasons. Newton himself censored his own writings in later years. He gets a job as the Newton was a troubled individual in certain ways, and he got a job as a it was a sinecure, but he took it very seriously as I think like the exchequer of the mint, and he went after forgers with lethal vengeance. And anyway, in the 1660s, the Royal Society was founded, and there was after that period, if you look at, there's an endnote in Passion of the Western Mind where I discuss this. Several books discuss this, and essays, Newton's Inside Out, and another book on prophecy and power. And the basic idea is that the middle of the 17th century, there was a very revolutionary epoch in England that was a predecessor and an anticipator of the French Revolution. Really, there's a continuity directly from it's called either the Great Rebellion or the Puritan Revolution in the 1640s and 50s. And during that period, there was an eruption of not just political libertarian kinds of, I shouldn't use that word libertarian, it has a different meaning now, but democratizing, but it was like a lot like the 1960s. I mean, there were nudist colonies. There was emancipation of women and men equal with a lot of religious enthusiasm. And the word enthusiasm, they were called enthusiasts. Tremendous sense of direct relationship to divinity, and nature was seen as divine, and the human being was, and the divinity of nature was very dynamic. And alchemy, Hermeticism, astrology were very popular during this period of revolutionary upheaval. And astrological almanacs outsold the Bible during this period. And then came the Restoration and the founding of the Royal Society and the mechanistic worldview of, laws that ruled the atoms, God's laws of nature that ruled this atomic mechanistic universe, was paralleled the assertion of a strong government over the people with the authority of state and church reestablished. And Newton himself, as part of this, suppressed his own earlier esoteric writings, so that it wasn't until much later that scholars dug it out and revealed it. So that's a little bit of the intimation of there was a conscious decision to, by, let's call it the establishment, to downplay or suppress religious enthusiasm, egalitarian, democratizing, gender-neutral, feminist. Also, there was a kind of erotic sexual revolution that was also part of that, but also esoteric. I mean, in other words, very much like the 1960s, and then something came down, and a suppression of that happened, so that the modern mechanistic worldview had, in some sense, a kind of political and religious establishment behind it. I'm always trying to emphasize, though, as I'm describing this, to not get caught in a literal determinism here, because it's overdetermined. It's not just that the political and religious establishment required this version of truth to be validated and the rest suppressed. It also seems to have been part of the whole emergence of a kind of solid egoic structure, so that it was taking place in different ways in the different countries with the different religious, Catholics having a different version of it, Mersenne being the crucial figure in France, working with Descartes and and Gassendi, the mechanists there. So it's not, I don't want this to be seen as a kind of plot, a kind of, what's that word, conspiracy. Larger forces are at work that use the conspirators. And that's why somebody like Luther, for example, totally, absolutely committed to a religious worldview, becomes the mediator of an event that has such problematic consequences for the religion that was so dear to him. Because larger archetypal forces were at work in the collective psyche that just, the technology, the political, the social, the new worlds being opened up by the navigators and so forth. Everything played a role. There's a kind of spontaneous eruption of a new mode of being. And I guess one way of putting this is that Rudolf Steiner talks about how when there's the emerging self, human ego is coming into being, it does so in some way connected to the fact that the intimate presence of the spiritual powers or the spiritual dimension withdraws. It withdraws in some sense to permit a greater sense of robust autonomy for this still fragile emerging ego. You see it in Augustine is clearly losing contact with a certain mode of divinity, a more primal participation. And so that's why he goes through such a crisis and has such a developed existential self-reflection. Luther is the same way, and Descartes in a different, with a different sensibility is doing it. Maybe just one last thing on this, and that is, let's look at Descartes and Shakespeare, put them together. Because in some ways these are the two figures who carry the two different modalities of the modern self that's emerging at the late 16th, early 17th century. How many of you saw that marvelous film Shakespeare in Love? It's about 15 years ago or so. Yeah. So it's really what we're seeing. Tom Stoppard co-wrote it, and it's about Shakespeare at the moment he's coming into his own. And the year that it's centered on, which historically is accurate, is 1596, 96, 97, right when Descartes is born. So Descartes represents that Descartes woke up in a Copernican universe, as John McDermott put it. So he's dealing with that, this spiral out of the old cosmology, and so he's got to think for himself. He's got to figure it out. He gets a total, very powerful Jesuit education. He takes in the whole, medieval thought and Renaissance thought, and then he just says, okay, I'm getting so much here. I just got to think for myself. I just got to wipe the slate clean. But in that sense of epistemological uncertainty, he places his bets on this sense of radical certainty that he gets from the mathematical understanding of the world, and connected with his Catholic faith. So behind that is God, behind the sense of the cogito, I know, I think, therefore I am, that sense of clear and distinct ideas, solid, rational, egoic consciousness, God is standing behind. He's still carrying the medieval spiritual principle while he is coming into the mechanistic, material, modern universe. You see how he's like, this is the whole Renaissance is just exactly, he's like the last moment of the Renaissance. The whole Renaissance is exactly that age of transition between the medieval and the modern. That's why it's carrying the Hermetic and such powerful Christian impulses at work, and at the same time a kind of new paganism, and then a new modernity is emerging. Like somebody like Machiavelli, totally modern political theorist. Okay, so that's Descartes. His view of the modern self is very much one of rationality. He doesn't. It's I think, therefore I am, and really it's I doubt, but therefore I am. But he is lining up his identity with reason. Shakespeare's very different. And so Shakespeare is carrying, he's carrying this much more diversely inflected multiplicity of the human spirit, and then he manages with some like kind of preternatural divine articulateness to give voice to every imaginable human condition of utter despair or murderous ambition or fatal jealousy or the madness of growing old or the beauty of falling in love. He gives every one of these such powerful articulation that the modern self is born through his language. This is Harold Bloom's. Many people grasp this, but Harold Bloom really explored this deeply. The literary historian and theorist, and Shakespeare can be seen as, in some sense, articulating, birthing the newly self-reflected, complex modern self. So he represents a counterpoint to the Cartesian, narrower modern identity, locked in rationality. So, and Shakespeare is much more. Now he's flourishing right while Descartes is born and still in his youth. And by the time Descartes is just coming of age and getting his breakthrough insights, that's right when Shakespeare puts down his pen. And actually Shakespeare dies 1616, and 1619 is when Descartes gets his. So Shakespeare's a little bit earlier, and he's carrying more of the Renaissance magical. So he's somebody who, for example, when he discusses astrology, I've read somewhere, there's something, this number is not right, but it said something, there's something like 100 and some astrological statements or predictions that are made in the Shakespearean plays, all of which come true. At the same time, Shakespeare gives voice to some of the most powerful questioning of astrological determinism. The fate is not in there, it doesn't come from the stars. The fate is being determined by ourselves, Brutus. And the there's a new sense of human self-responsibility at the same time as still living in a magical universe. So he's immersed in still an astrological cosmos, but he's experiencing the autonomy and self-responsibility of the modern self emerging in him, and so he's perfectly in the middle of those worlds. And by the way, Shakespearean tragedy, the first really and greatest eruption of the tragic literary genre and sensibility since Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, there's a new sense of, it's definitely in continuity with that great tradition, but he also is bringing there's a new sense of human freedom and self-responsibility compared to being kind of gripped by the fate of what is being determined that in Sophocles by the gods or by fate. So, or by one's own predetermined character. So Shakespeare really is another. I want to offer him as a counterpoint to the Cartesian sense of modern selfhood, and in some sense, Shakespeare therefore carries the anticipation of Romanticism, just as Descartes carries the anticipation of the Enlightenment, and which become the two poles of the modern sensibility, the Enlightenment and Romanticism, sun and moon, basically, solar and lunar. So, which we'll address in the next class and your reading as well. Okay. Any other questions or thoughts? Please, Josh.
Yes, I was wondering if you could talk about the distinction between nominalism and realism, and whether it's like a paradox that you can be a nominalist but a realist in other ways, or. And I was thinking of like Hillman and how he's like anti-nominalism, but at the same time talks about the multivalence of the archetype. Is it like the distinction between like the many and the one, or?
Right. Okay. So Josh is bringing up the great medieval battle over universals, which was the battle between the nominalists and the realists. And as I think we mentioned before, realism isn't the realism of, well, this is real, and my fantasy about this desk is not as real as this is, that kind of mentality. That's not the realism that we're talking about. It's realism with a capital R that refers to that the real is the Platonic ideas, the transcendent, or the Aristotelian version of it was also considered another form of realism in the medieval period, which was that the universals are real, but they're in this world. But there really is a universal form of the human, or of the horse, that all horses have horseness. They are horses because the form, the universal form and essence of horseness exists in them. For Plato, there was a transcendent idea or form of the archetypal horse, like in Equus, that play, that existed while Aristotle made this immanent. But for the medieval mind, both the Platonic and the Aristotelian version of universals were considered realists. Those were forms of realism. The nominalists were saying, nomina means name, that these are just names, these are just words for generalizations that the human mind is abstracting from seeing many particular horses or many particular human beings, and then saying, okay, there's a general category that I can posit of humanness or of horse, etc. But for the nominalists, that's just a word. It's an abstraction. It's something that is a human construct out of the chaos of and plenitude of the empirical world. And I think what happened in the course of the, this is the primal worldview is archetypally saturated. It's animistic. There's no difference between the concrete specific tree and the archetypal treeness. And the primal, the axial, Platonic and transcendent worldviews continue to have a very robust sense of the archetypal, but with a new sense of separation from the empirical world, and a greater conceptual, philosophical articulation, as Plato gave it, and the Platonic tradition, and Aristotle in a different way. Okay. I think what happened, just as we talked about with that withdrawal of the spiritual dimension so that the robust human self can start to forge itself, that also is part of what nominalism is about. Nominalism becomes common sense more and more, starting in the later Middle Ages. And then, as I think it's Charles Sanders Peirce, the American philosopher in the late 19th century, had a big influence on William James and others. He said, we have been inundated by a flood of nominalism from Descartes, Bacon, and Locke on. Modernity is nominalist, except for Romanticism, which carries the mythic, the gods, the archetypal dimension. But it, as we will see, it's in a different position than these earlier ones because it's dealing with the modern scientific universe. Okay, now Hillman, and I don't want to go too far into this right now, but Hillman is a complex character because he's very postmodern in some ways, and he's simultaneously drawing on the animistic and the Platonic tradition of a personified and archetypal world, but he also is, for much of his writing, highly rebellious against any kind of assertion of a metaphysical reality. Rather, he is more dancing with psyche all the time, and and so he'll talk about the gods, and he'll, with capital G, as a way of lowering the ontological superiority of God and the Judeo-Christian deity. He sees that as just being a big, he calls it the monotheistic ego. It's a big problem for him, and he wants to assert the multiplicity of the soul against the rational intellect and the egoic spirit that tries to assert one truth over that multiplicity. But in doing so, he honors the many archetypes, and within each archetype, he says, these aren't literal entities, these are multivalent potentialities of many possible meanings, and you just got to keep dancing with them and not getting caught in a determinate literal reality. So Hillman's a complicated case, but that's a little bit of Hillman's genius. Okay, anybody else have anything they'd like to ask or comment on? Okay, well, let's call it a day. A lot of material in 2 hours and 55 minutes, so we can get out. And so 3 weeks from now is the next meeting, right? So not 2 weeks or 1 week, but 3 weeks from now, November 30th, I believe it is. And This is the shortest reading so far that you'll be doing, but it's got lots in it. It's really the movement of the late modern into the postmodern, and it's discussing Romanticism, which is crucial to the whole story. Okay, thanks a lot.